you, Jonathan, for that very generous, what sounded like an obituary rather than an introduction. Could you come to my funeral and say such kind things about me? Hopefully you don't seem like... hopefully you don't say I'm a very young guy when you come. And that would be a failure on my part. And the one thing you missed from my CV is that I'm the captain of the House of Commons football team. I know Herzliya, the Israeli football team, are staying just now before the game with Russia this evening. But the only reason I'm captain is because all the others are absolutely awful. And my captaincy, we've had great managers. Who would be Kenny Dalglish, Alex Ferguson? All of these great managers have tried to improve our team. And in my captaincy, we've played 16 matches, and we've managed to draw none of them, and lose all of them. And for those of you who follow British politics, when you consider that one of the matches, and you really have to follow British politics perhaps more closely than most to understand why this is important, when you consider that one of the matches that the House of Commons football team lost was against the House of Lords. Now, you'll have your own image of the House of Lords, but they're not all as young as Jonathan says I look, although I don't feel. And that's why whenever we have a vote in Parliament on the reforming our constitution, I vote to abolish the House of Lords, because it's pretty embarrassing losing at football to them. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about that, but thank you for your very kind introduction, Jonathan. And it's a real delight to be back in Israel, regular visitor, and it's very kind of Sir David and others to help make my visit possible this time. Well, talking about football, tennis has really dominated my past 24 hours. As a Scot, I'm sure you've worked that out. I was up till after 4 o'clock this morning watching Andy Murray winning his first Grand Slam. But I also, on the El Al flight yesterday, had the chance to share the flight with someone that you, I'm sure all the Israelis here are very proud of, Noam Gershoni, the hero who fought, of course, for his country and has now won gold for his country in my country. A remarkable, incredible man to win that gold medal. But it is, in saying all of those comments, it's really, as I say, a pleasure to be here, to be at the conference, to listen to so many distinguished speakers, all of whom know much more about some of the subjects than I would ever endeavour to suggest. But it is, I think, an important event. It's representative of the way in which I suspect politicians like myself across world capital should try and make policy more effectively in the future, bringing people from all sorts of different backgrounds and different countries together. And as others have reflected, it's also an extraordinarily poignant day with the 11th anniversary of September the 11th. And we'll all have our own overriding emotions and feelings about that dreadful, drastic day. And it's one of those few events in life where you will never forget where you were, what you were doing, and who you were with when you first heard and saw those scenes. And those feelings of disbelief, of compassion, of resolve stirred us all and stay with us all. And that day taught us many things, and I just wish to mention two that have stuck with me. First of all, there's a fundamental misconception on the part of the perpetrators of that violent extremism. The power of our democracies don't come from the strength of our buildings, but the resolve of our people. And such atrocities strengthen, I believe, our people's belief in the freedoms that are being attacked and the determination to defend them above all else. And the second is that many in the world had not yet awoken to the lethal reality of an ideology which will weaponize any means to achieve its destructive ends. The contortion of a noble faith to inspire violence was in no way new to 2001, but that act was unprecedented in scale and design. September the 11th didn't create a new threat, but it did alter the balance of risk as to the force with which and in which way we must deal with that threat. So for any discussion on counter-terrorism, it could perhaps not be more apt to have a reminder of the scale of the threat we face and the values that we cherish that are at stake. Now, from a UK perspective, we as a nation have faced decades of domestic terrorism. In fact, Commissioner Leopard reminded me in his speech earlier this morning that we actually faced centuries of domestic terrorism. And international terrorism rightly remains in the UK's top tier of threats. While terrorism is not a modern phenomenon, the modern security landscape in many ways exacerbates the potential activity of terrorists. Today, individuals and organisations pose threats alongside those emanating from nation states. And it's often spurious religious rather than crude national interests which drive these malignant intentions. Our security strategies necessarily are becoming more complex, more intricate, and more multifaceted than ever before. And I had the good fortune of serving as a government minister under the premierships of both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and there's very little that it's enjoyable about losing an election and being in opposition. There's only two. One is the chance to spend more time with your family. I'm not sure they share that view, and the second is the chance to formulate policy afresh, free from the constraints of a government machine, free from the intellectual barriers of the freedom of intellectual curiosity that comes with that freedom. And that's why I'm heading up Her Majesty's Official Opposition review of our defence policy. And I wish to talk for a little time about that today. Our review began at the time of the Arab Spring, one of the most seismic events that any of us have ever lived through. We all know why the Arab Spring started, but we don't yet know how it will end. What we do know is that the early euphoria of the Arab Spring has rightly been matched by concerns about our collective and individual security. The hope remains that the wave of change could provide opportunities to forge new partnerships with new democracies, but it also creates a danger of security vacuums or weak regimes in a region with shallow democratic roots. On the Arab Spring, there are others here today better qualified than me to talk through these issues and describe how the changes we have seen look from Haifa or Hadera or Ashdod or Beersheba. But I want to offer an insight on counter-terrorism and global security concerns from a UK defence and diplomacy perspective. And as a priority in the UK, we know that we must do all we can to ensure that the anti-autocratic instincts that gave birth to the Arab Spring are not abused by those who seek to control for their malign purposes. The hurdles that we do have to overcome are great, as we know, as we seek to deal with this security threat. And in the sense of trying to overcome it, my worry is that in a context of recent times, that a consequence of recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, there will be that permanent sense of a concept of unpopular deployment of armed forces. So I worry that as a consequence of those recent conflicts, that has created a permanent unpopular concept. Now, of course, we know that both of those conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq were different, but they have, of course, been conflated in the public's mind. And in a world where we often talk about an arc of instability ranging from states in West Africa to states in Central and Southeast Asia, there is a state missing from that conversation about the arc of instability. It's missing from the analysis of those states of danger. And the missing state is a state of ambivalence. And that state of ambivalence, even though we would care about the security situation, even though our values were being tested and our nation's security jeopardized, we would still care about the threats, but we would not be able to act. And because, for reasons that we all know, our publics, our domestic publics in European capitals and NATO capitals have been tested by that conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. Domestic publics the world over are wary and weary of international action, a mindset exacerbated by budget constraints. Think about it now. Have you seen on your television sets the demands in world capitals for action about the war in Syria and the slaughter of innocent civilians? As a Member of Parliament representing tens of thousands of people in the UK, I've had less than 10 letters from people demanding that the UK undertake any aggressive action to remedy that situation. And I think the prevailing thought that drives this potential state of ambivalence and weariness in the public's mind is, why are we making budget cuts at home while the politicians are thinking about embroiling us again in discretionary conflicts abroad? But as events in North Africa and the Middle East have shown us all, there is no opt-out from global events. The principal danger of this state of ambivalence is that in those states where the risk of conflict is highest, its drivers would be able to proceed unabated. We would believe in universal values, but we just may not so readily stand up for them. So we in European capitals must therefore continue to make the case for a proactive defence policy with our own populations, learning lessons from a recent past and facing those threats of our future. So for the UK, alongside concerns about Pakistan, our immediate priority is preventing Afghanistan from ever again becoming a safe haven for Al-Qaeda or other contortions of violent Islamic-inspired violence. We all know that NATO helped to win the Cold War, but NATO, that most sophisticated of military alliances ever created, is now being tested in Afghanistan. And we are clear that success there depends not just on our post-2014 plan, not just about the pace of our exit, but the politics that we leave behind. We must find a political settlement both inside and outside the country, which simultaneously supports indigenous security forces. This is the UK's fourth war in Afghanistan. We have fought 4 wars in that country, and we have no intention of ever fighting a 5th. So we share with our US allies the belief that defeating Al-Qaeda is a principal mission in our core national interest. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates continue to pose significant threats in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia, and many other countries. But in this challenge, we have to adapt our weaponry and strategies to deal with the scientific and technological advances our foes have equipped themselves with. It's not an exaggeration to say that the emergence of cyberspace is amongst the biggest changes in human history. Until now, we have operated in 4 contested areas: land, sea, air, and space. We now have a 5th contested territory of information security. The criminals use it to have access to money, states use it to have access to information, and terrorists increasingly using it to cause us ill. So we need the best software, but our ability to deter and tackle cyber attacks lies in creating both the infrastructure and the culture that allows preventative capabilities to be continually enhanced. Scientific advances have been matched by increased ease of knowledge sharing, which will mean it is more difficult in future to keep important chemical, biological, and other information out of the hands of those who may have intent to put it to malign use. We all know, however, that the vast majority of countries are good global citizens. Contrary to what JFK said in his warning about the number of nuclear-armed nations, contrary to what he suggested, there aren't more than 20 nuclear-armed nations, but there are still too many, despite it being only single digits. And the number of known or suspected holders of chemical weapons continues to drop as declared stocks are eliminated and global norms are strengthened. But this threat isn't simply proportionate to the number of equipped states, but the existence of malign intent and the presence of unregulated materials. So the CBRN threat is rightly a Tier 1 in the UK, a Tier 1 threat in the UK, and our policy should have at its core good intelligence, coordinated export controls, strong international agreements deeply implemented in national policies, and well-organised response capabilities. The threat of chemical weapons is particularly poignant in light of events in Syria, where a desired transition has been replaced by deadly disintegration. With the fourth largest global stocks of chemical weapons, the threat posed by a post-Assad Syria in which these stocks are seized could be as, if not more dangerous, as Assad-controlled Syria in which these stocks are retained. But there are also longer-term trends towards which our security posture must be geared. In some regions such as South Asia, East Africa, the Middle East, and of course the Arctic, climate change may reinforce instability trends, mass migration, and conflict over resources. The conditions which are giving rise to radicalization we have seen from a recent history can in turn necessitate interventions from the international community. And as a key driver of such conditions, climate change must be considered a vital issue of international security. The last area I want to talk about is some of the lessons that I draw from our recent past. And of course, when we talk about these things, lessons and consequences are entirely different matters. But I want to talk about three key lessons that we have learned which will drive our approach in the United Kingdom as we formulate new policies in opposition. First, we have seen that internal oppression is one of the biggest security threats we face. In the past, a strong government was confused with being a stable state, whereas in fact strong, unelected government often means a weak state. We know that citizens who are free, well-educated and prosperous tend to be responsible, to feel solidarity with a society in which they have a stake. Nations that are free, democratic and benefiting from economic progress tend to be stable and solid partners in the advancement of our values. But the reverse, ominously, is also true. And so an effective defence of our security lies in the spread of our values. The second lesson that I learned as a Shadow Secretary of State for Defence is that the most effective defence policy isn't always the latest piece of military hardware, but can be a world-class international development policy. That investment in education, democratic reform, and viable economies can hinder the spread of conflict. And the careful prevention of development policy can be so much better than the painful cure of military action. In future, sustainable stability will be achieved by supporting systems which empower people and enable them to be part of an organic civil society at home and abroad. All of that demands better coordination of development and defence policy. Post-conflict reconstruction plan must be a core part of any pre-battle plan in the future. And the third area I want to talk about in terms of a lesson is about multilateralism in defence. There has been much talk of the international community's response to events in Libya, in stark contrast to Syria. Successfully securing a UN resolution, gaining the support of the Arab League and working with Arab nations on military missions all signal that this was a collective international operation. And it is vital that defence and counter-terrorism policy is internationally coordinated wherever that is possible. Strengthening multilateral institutions is crucial, as is a new emphasis on conflict resolution through regional reconciliation. But we also need increased cooperation on expenditure within NATO states if we're to be successful in challenging terrorism, cyber, and so much else. But across Europe, defence spending has declined substantially between 2008 and 2010. Defence spending in NATO European member states has fallen an average of more than 7% just over those 2 years. So defence spending should always be decided by national governments. But NATO members are making significant cuts to defence capability in isolation of one another, the aggregate consequence of which may be capability shortfalls across the alliance. So we now need a conversation on how reductions in transnational defence spending and the resultant changes in force structures can be better coordinated. The practice of fighting conflicts together, but preparing for them individually, must now come to an end. So in conclusion, throughout our history, the notions of sovereignty have evolved. The rise of a sense of opaque sovereignty, where events and actions within borders where only the business of domestic authorities has given way to globalization and the rise of technology, media, multilateralism, and a shift towards transparent sovereignty, where events have significance and implications across borders and national interest is often entwined with events overseas. So I believe it's all of our roles to secure our own individual and collective security in these circumstances. And the best way of doing so is promoting the conditions which will allow freedom to flourish, to give citizens a stake in their societies, and to ensure responsibilities and resolutions are shared. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.